get started, a word from our friends over at Virginia Theological Seminary. As the largest Episcopal seminary in the United States, VTS forms men and women for leadership in the church. They offer the traditional Master's in Divinity, Anglican Studies, and Doctor of Ministry degrees, as well as the new Master of Arts degree with a focus in Theological Studies, Christian Formation, Religion and Culture, or Biblical Interpretation. VTS offers educational experiences in local congregations, schools, and hospitals, as well as cross-cultural immersions throughout the world. Go ahead and check them out over at vts.edu or on Facebook. Okay, here's your program. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Yaw. Welcome to ChurchNext. It's a place, as you know, where energetic Christian leaders come to hear from experienced mentors, from people who have a passion for building healthy congregations. How do we get young people to come to church? Well, it's a question many older people ask as they look around their congregations, lamenting the dearth of young people in their midst. And my guest today is a woman who's put a lot of energy into studying this issue and has some terrific wisdom to share with us. I'm talking with Carol Howard Merritt. She's a Presbyterian minister, an author, a blogger. And Carol, welcome to ChurchNext. Great to have you here. And why don't we begin right there? You wrote a book called Tribal Church, to look into the spirituality of younger people. What did you find?
Yes, I wrote Tribal Church, and I found a lot of things. When I talked to people who had been working with young adults, I was concentrating basically on people in their 20s and 30s. And when I spoke to people who were doing a great job with young adults, they told me a lot of the same things. Of course, each context is different, and in each way, each ministry looked a little different, but there were a lot of things that were the same. And basically, the first thing was that there was a connection with God. There was a chance for spiritual connection, whether that was through praying ancient liturgies, whether it was through walking meditation, whether it was through contemplative prayer, but this real discipline of taking the spiritual life and making that the forefront was important. And I see this over and over again. I mean, a lot of times we have this idea that we have to spend, thousands of dollars on this multimedia presentation and have all kinds of things going on.
Because that's what the kids want.
Yeah, that's what the kids want. And meanwhile, the kids are taking their yoga mats and going to the yoga studio to get some peace and some connection with their body and with God. And so I saw that. And also just a very strong drive for social justice. It seems like in a new generation, there is much more theological action. We even see this with a lot of discontent with evangelicalism. A lot of people are leaving evangelicalism because they're frustrated that evangelical in their political movements sometimes, especially if you've been raised in the religious right, as I was, they haven't had as much concern politically for the poor or for the environment or for many of the things that are big issues right now. So connection with God, connection with the world through social justice ministries, realizing that our ministries aren't bound within the walls, in the concrete walls of our churches, but it is in the saving work of God that goes out beyond those walls, that's moving beyond the walls. And finally, I would say just a chance for people to connect with one another, meet with one another, and form deep communities. The reason why I came up with the title Tribal Church was because of a journalist who often talked about urban tribes. His name is Ethan Waters, and he talked about young adults who would move away from their families. They'd move into urban areas or move into areas where they didn't know many people. There was a lot of job transitions, and so they were moving from place to place. So what he noticed was that younger people tend to form tribes and groups of people that would come together and meet with one another, eat with one another. And I
kind of like that
realized,
TV show Friends. Remember that? They didn't seem to have any other extended family.
Right. There was Friends, there was Seinfeld, there was, a lot of these shows were kind of mirroring what was going on. And so he wrote about that. And as I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just like me. This is what we do. And also, if the church could begin imagining themselves with that metaphor. It's a biblical metaphor. It's a metaphor that's current, very current in our society as well. And it really gets to that issue of deep community with one another. Of course, the church is a little different than what Ethan Waters was explaining and different than Friends, because we have that beauty of intergenerational relationships too.
Well, and it's a beauty, but it's a challenge because, Carol, as I'm listening to you, and a lot of the folks who listen to ChurchNext are folks like me who are in established churches that have long traditions, that have been there a while, and we're going about the work as you're doing in your congregation of renewal. And you're describing a way of doing church that may be a bit upsetting when you talk about connection with God and making the spiritual life through ancient liturgies and daily prayers something normative. Many of the older folks are fed spiritually in a different way through the regimen of doing church. It's a bit different. So that becomes a bit of does that become a bit of a challenge for established churches?
Oh yes, there's a lot of tension going on, not only with my congregation, but with across the nation. If any church is really seriously reaching out to younger adults, then they're feeling a bit of that tension. And people deal with it in different ways. Sometimes you have the ability to start a new congregation or a new community within the church. Sometimes people like to keep worshiping intergenerationally, but making sure that all the different generations are heard. But there's tremendous challenges. I know in my church, when I started kind of a Taizé type prayer service, some of the older folks said, well, that's way too Catholic for us. and so there's oftentimes those tensions, and that's one of the important jobs that we have as ministers and church leaders, because there are not many people, organizations, advertising agencies who have figured out how to do this. When big corporations want to advertise to, when they want to advertise to certain people, they split up the demographic. They advertise to my daughter differently than they would advertise to me, and they advertise to my mother differently than they would advertise to me. And all through our society, we have segmented entertainment, segmented reading, segmented, all sorts of things where we just kind of pull people apart and target each generation. But the church is one place where we say, no, we come together, we worship together. We may do it at a different time, or we may do it in a different space, or we may have different small groups, but we're in this together. And I think it's going to be monumental in our society to have different generations speaking together, because we have a lot of intergenerational challenges ahead. And it's important for the church to be central to those conversations in our society.
Well, sure, but going about that is the challenge, I think, of when hearing you describe what young adults, what particularly appeals to them, as you did with this framework of communing with God, of a strong desire for social justice and connection, a generation or two ago, they might have said, well, yeah, I distinguish myself by being Presbyterian or Episcopalian or Catholic. And what you've named doesn't fit in that framework, because all of them can do that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. In fact, it's kind of funny because I often come up against kind of progressive Christians who say, I'm a social justice Christian, and they act almost as if like social justice and evangelism like don't go together, or planting churches or innovative ministry and social justice don't go together, but they do. I mean, all of this can work well together. We've had this kind of idea in our mind that either you love God and you have a spirituality, you have, and evangelicalism has been really a product of, people who have kind of an intense personal spirituality, or you care about society and you care about, the poor and feeding the hungry, and you just don't mix those two. But we do mix those two. And within Presbyterianism, there are those streams of justice, and there are those streams of what Calvin would call piety. There are those real disciplines within the belly of our tradition and our church. So I think it's important to reclaim those. But you're absolutely right. People don't know the difference between Presbyterian and Protestant and Pentecostal. That's just not something.
Yeah, it's just not something that's really on the radar of what I'm guessing you're finding young adults, and certainly anecdotally in my experience that has any importance whatsoever. And right. what you're putting forward here, Carol, is that the church has a place to be intergenerational in a way that no place else does.
Absolutely. And we have two crises in our society right now, very important things that we need to talk about nationally. One thing is with the economic crisis and how it's affect people who are about to head into retirement. We have the baby boomers that are heading into retirement. Many of them didn't save in the first place, but those who did save had their equity and their housing abolished. They had their
when they were told that was the safest place to put it.
Right. They had their savings, disintegrate in the stock market. They're in very difficult straits. And then you have on the other end, you have young adults who are entering the job market, and there aren't many jobs. The economic crisis has really, really affected young adults who are trying to get...
I mean, I'm not as aware that there aren't many jobs. I'm more concerned that the debt load they have is going to keep them, in hock till they're 40.
Right. Their debt load is very problematic. They don't have many jobs. The housing costs have risen in many areas, especially in urban areas where young adults have to be, and their salaries have stayed stagnant. So many times, especially people in their 20s, over half of them are moving back in with their parents. Yeah. And so we can do things as a society right now. We're basically calling these people losers, and how can you do this, and we have a big debate in our society about these losers who can't get a job. But what if in the church we start modeling intergenerational community and telling parents, no, you're not overly sympathetic by having your child live in one of the 4 empty bedrooms in your home instead of out on the streets? What if we have a community where we can say, okay, maybe you're not ready for retirement, but that's okay. You can live with one of your daughters in one of your daughter's empty homes, and that's okay. Intergenerational living intergenerational community is going to have to be the answer to a lot of our societal problems. And if we can't talk about these issues in the church, I'm afraid there's not many other places where generations come together to talk about issues.
Did you, the two crises in our society right now then, the economic crisis is what you mentioned. Was that one, or did that include both those?
Well, I'm saying the economic crisis is both hitting number one,
older and younger,
older adults, and number two, younger adults.
Gotcha. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So for the church then, one of the ways for the church then to be the church in this new normal, if you will, is to really be places not only for that conversation, but for the support of those challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And, frankly, I don't hear too much about it. I mean, I speak a lot to churches and to denominations about the crises that are happening with young adults. And we really have many times this attitude that that the general culture has, and basically it's kind of like, well, they should just lift themselves up by their bootstraps, just go get a job. What's their problem? They're narcissistic, they're greedy, and we have all these names for them. But in reality, if half of our young adults aren't making it in the same way with living independently by the time you're 20, then there's something wrong with the system, or something needs to shift in the system. Our expectations need to shift. Our ideas of what's important. Is independent living the most important thing? I mean, is that what we should be striving for as Christians? Or should we be striving for deeper community? The church has a lot to say about this, historically, theologically, and culturally. And I think it would be a good thing if we start saying it.
Yeah, well, but we're just so tied in with the idea of the American dream, though, Carol, aren't we? And every chicken for every pot, and everybody with their own home. And I mean, to live this, I mean, you're describing kind of a radical way to live it. I mean, have you been reading too much of the New Testament or something? Or?
Yeah, that Acts 2, man.
So yeah, right. So anyway, so tribal church, and that's the name of your blog too, right?
Right.
And so you're looking for a way of a church construct then that will be able to address, and these you mentioned are two biggest crises right now, but places that will be truly intergenerational. So when somebody comes up to you and says, "How do I attract young people in my church?" Your answer seems to be, we're all in this together.
Right. And I sit around tables all the time where we don't quite hear the needs of young adults. We don't quite hear, and if we hear the needs, we think that they're being narcissistic and whiny. And that's sort of the general idea is, well, if they didn't have Twitter, they wouldn't whine so much and they wouldn't be so narcissistic. But can the church be a place where we do begin to listen to these ideas and understand them, and can we start focusing them on as part of what we do as church? Of course, I know that in our congregations, I laugh because I've been in churches where if you change the Advent candles from purple to blue, you basically have a riot.
Your bags are packed the next day.
Right. I mean, I've been, working in church for 12 years, so I realize that tomorrow we're not going to be starting, major communities within our congregation, and everything's not going to change tomorrow. And I understand that. And there's a lot of things that I don't want to change that are really, really wonderful about our congregations and our churches. And many times people will come to the church that I serve, and they expect this like really, really outrageous, different service. And the truth is, our congregation never changed our liturgy since like 1922. It's a very, very conservative, liturgically conservative congregation, but it has a very progressive message. So I'm not saying that, forget everything. We've got to forget the traditional church completely or anything like that. What I am saying is that we've spent a lot of time worrying about who's in our pews and worrying about our numbers, which is important to worry about. But until we begin to realize that, the saving work of Jesus Christ is not bound to our attendance, and we begin to move out beyond the walls of our church and care about the concerns of a new generation, care about the concerns of feeding people and housing people and sheltering them, it's going to be, we're just not doing the work of Christ in an important way.
And so you're really, I mean, this is an urge or a challenge towards mission, towards embracing again what it is that started the place in the first place.
Sure.
Which is to go out and what you've mentioned a couple times, Carol, is this idea of listening and truly listening, not just hearing it and saying, okay, that goes under answer 4B because I've heard that before. But is that really how you begin making helping the church become younger? Is actually listening to the voices of younger people?
Oh, absolutely. And if you do listen, you will hear a lot of younger people who have felt frustrated because they haven't been heard for a while.
And what keeps them from being heard? I mean, are we just too self-absorbed, Carol? Are we just too afraid that things are changing, so we clam up, or we put corks in our ears?
Well, if you look at things structurally, I mean, a lot of things happened just because of our structure. So it's your audience mostly Presbyterian?
I think main lines. A lot of them, a lot of Episcopalians. That's what I am, and a lot of Methodists. And,
okay. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay.
Okay, so oftentimes to be involved with the church leadership, many times we have we meet during times when retired people need to be involved with. Our specific denomination, Presbyterian Church, we have a lot of churches who can't afford pastors, and so they have retired ministers serving in those churches, or retired lay people serving in the churches, or we have the age of our leadership skews about 55. The age of our members skews about it's over 60. For most main lines, it's between 57 to 60, 62, around there. And so, so for the most part, when all of your leadership is in a particular generation, and everyone who is participating in different committees and things are part of a particular generation, and your congregations will reflect your leadership because that's who you're hearing. And when we try to get younger people involved, oftentimes it's very hard for us because, think about the mom 50 years ago or you don't even have to go that far. My mother stayed at home. She did the dishes, she worked, my dad had a car, she didn't have a car. The one time she really got out of the house was on Sunday morning. And believe me, we all went to church on Sunday morning because that was the sole purpose of her social life. That was her, it was everything. That's where she was able to teach Sunday school. That's where she was able to create masterpieces of potluck culinary arts.
Yeah, right.
It's where she was able to have incredible leadership, was in church. Now, for someone like me, or one of my friends, she has a full-time job. She goes home, she does the dishes, does the laundry, tries to get the kids to do homework, tries to get them to bed, and on Sunday morning, there's not that same compelling drive to get out of the house, to have leadership skills, to exercise leadership, to, all of those many things that church meant for my mom. And our churches have been working with incredible, incredible volunteer hours from women for decade after decade. Well, that's just not shifting generationally. Yeah. And so when we come together around our tables, it's just very hard when it comes to reaching out and hearing younger members, because in younger leadership, because many times we're not there. And then if you talk to the leaders who are there, they often tell experiences of being shut out. Now, I can really, I know this is silly for me to say because I've basically made a living off of people listening to me, but as I hear other people, I know that this is a big concern.
Well, and one of the things, and what you touch on, Carol, and I think this always bears repeating, is that it's been studied and said that the change in your church attendance, church membership, etc., up to changes in the societal context that you have absolutely no control over, make up for 60% and higher of what your church is going to end up looking like. And you can hire the best pastor, the best spiritual administrator, etc., and continue to kind of, work around the car and without realizing that the whole road has changed, that you have no control over, to use a bad metaphor. But I think that's important and that bears repeating.
Right. And many times in our churches, mainline congregations, we made it a point to plant congregations in rural areas. And so when I was serving Abbeville, Louisiana, I would serve a congregation where there was an Episcopal church, a Presbyterian church, a Methodist church, all kinds of Pentecostal and Baptist churches. And it was a very small community. Well, the community changed, the factory left, the farmers went from having, hundreds of farmers to having agribusiness, so very few farmers. The post office was closing down, the school was closing down, everything was closing down, and yet we expect all of those churches to stay open. Well, there's a shift from many of these rural communities into urban areas. So my challenge to mainline churches is, can we start focusing on these urban areas? Can we start planting new communities? Can we start thinking about what might grow in those areas? And I think if we began to shift our focus a little bit from kind of dying or the rifts that we've been struggling with, I think this could be a very exciting time for us.
Well, and one of the things that I'm inferring from what you're saying, Carol, is that one of the criticisms for young people in church is, well, of course, young people don't care about God. and of course, we're going the way of Europe, and soon there'll be nobody in church, and I mean, from your blogging and from your book, that's not the case. That there is an active and vital spiritual life among younger generations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, how long did Eat, Pray, Love and Eckhart Tolle used to be on the top of the bestsellers list? And you look all around, there's all kinds of signs of spiritual life really flourishing. And that is a lot different from, okay, we're going to open the doors of a mainline congregation and everybody's going to flood in. We don't live in that world any longer, but we live definitely in a world where people are searching and seeking for something, and it's very important, that spiritual search.
Yeah, and so you begin to see how traditional churches respond to that, and sometimes it may mean the vehicle that you're looking for is no longer this one. Or it needs such, I mean, it's the insurance company, do we total it, or do we have to so radically put it back together that it addresses the needs? And so I would assume you have conversations regarding both choices.
Right. And I mean, there are churches, our church in particular was about to close. They were on the floor of the denominational body, and the denomination was going to close them, and a couple of members from the church really made a plea and said, okay, we still have a mission here in Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. We really, really want to do some work here. Please keep us open. So the denomination voted to keep them open, and they changed their mindset.
Okay.
They decided that they would hire a younger minister, and this was 35 years ago. They'd hire a younger minister, and they would do whatever it took.
Okay.
And one of the main things that they did a few things, but they started a campus ministry. They, because we're very close to GW University, they started Miriam's Kitchen, which is just an amazing, now it's grown to a really amazing organization, Miriam's Kitchen. But they, about every 5 years ago or so, they would start a new ministry, a new outreach. So we started Miriam's Kitchen. They started Project Create, which helps with children in creating art and for children who are in transitional housing. Professional artists go and help these children create art. And we helped to start an organization called Helping Individual Prostitutes Survive. It's HIPS, and it really helps and aids sex workers in DC. And right now we're in the midst of working with an Ethiopian health network. Network Ethiopia is what it's called. But it's so they just have this ability now to help start new organizations and really think about their whole community.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Oh, so I believe in, I believe in resurrection. I believe in revitalization. Sometimes, though, you'll have a different experience. You'll have people who will say, okay, well, we're all about 70 years old, and we're going to rent out parts of the building until we all die, and then that'll be the end. And I think both are okay. I'd rather see the former than the latter. But when the latter happens, then I think it's helpful to use whatever resources we can to build a new church for the next generation.
Right. But putting that DNA into a congregation to always recreate becomes very important, I'm gathering from what you're saying. And also hitting bottom, it sounds like, boy, it sounded like the drunk waking up and saying, I'll do anything. I'll go to those meetings to be able to. But we know both are familiar with the congregational life cycle, and that it doesn't have to get to the bottom. It can renew at a healthy pace. So what are some of the characteristics, Carol, of congregations that are going to continue to renew at a healthy point in the curve?
Well, I think I talk a lot about something that I've taken from Diana Butler Bass, and also Phyllis Tickle has chimed in on it. But they talk a lot about spiritual retraditioning.
Yeah.
So many times what we need to do is, when we find that a custom isn't moving from one generation to the next, we need to begin to imagine what are the customs involved and what are the traditions involved in that, and how can we make that custom move to a tradition that makes sense. So let me give you an example. We had a yard sale in one of my congregations, and everybody would bring their things to this yard sale, and they would spend all year bringing stuff to the yard sale. And then they would spend countless hours making sure that the price tags were on all the items, and sorting everything out, and it took months for this yard sale. Well, they noticed that the next generation of moms just weren't showing up for the yard sale. I mean, they would show up that day, but not for any of the prep or planning, and the dads weren't there either, and the younger generation in general. So it was very frustrating. They didn't know what to do about it. So finally, they just there was a lot of intergenerational tension between the two. And the younger people were saying, this just doesn't make sense for us. We just don't have this time that the retired folks do. And so I often think about that yard sale and what we could do. And there were a lot of traditions within the custom of the yard sale. We had people who were selling, who were being good stewards of their environment and their things, and they were reselling things. We were giving the money to missions. We were helping out people coming into the church. The community was coming into the church, and we would be able to talk to them and invite them to church. So there was an evangelistic element to it. There was the ability for us to fellowship together as people would work on things together. They'd get to know about each other's lives. And so there were many traditions that were important in that yard sale. And now, I wonder if we could have done it differently. So could we have put those items on eBay instead? Or could we have, there's just many things that, maybe if we were able to take the time intensity out of it and some of those customs out of it, it would have been a tradition that we would have been able to save. We ended up not saving the yard sale, and I'm not sure if they reinstalled it when I was gone, if they missed it once I was gone, but there are things like that within our churches over and over again.
I think of the same dynamic, Carol, with the kitchen crew who has forever arranged for these lavish feasts, and my young people are like, I'll just stop over at the restaurant and bring it. And that's some for some reason that's or it's a big travesty if you can't have everything home cooked and you call in a caterer. So moving through those generational bumps can be, it takes conversation, doesn't it?
Right. It takes conversation and it takes understanding. I mean, it's very easy for us to say, well, obviously a new generation just doesn't love Jesus as much as we did. And they're just not committed to the church. They're just not loyal. And that's when people start walking away, because they don't really, oftentimes people don't need my church or your church. They may need the church. But if they're just going to get, nitpicks because they picked up the cookies from Safeway instead of making them after 40 hours of work,
right.
They're not coming back.
Yeah. No, we need to be. So you're really you're elaborating on. I mean, I guess we started off by talking about listening, but that's really a deeper form of listening and understanding and seeing where the other is being challenged and putting yourself in their shoes as well. I want to ask you, Carol, because you mentioned you do talk to a lot of different groups, you get out a lot. What are some of the really hopeful signs you're seeing in mainline life these days?
Well, when I started out, I figured that we would be all about kind of resurrecting. I love buildings. I love liturgy. I love the traditional church. Mm-hmm. And I'm a convert. I grew up in a mega church and went to the beautiful downtown Presbyterian church. And so I'm really a convert to mainline. And so I just see a lot in the traditional church that I love. And so I expected that, I would go out and we would be talking about, let's change this, let's change that, let's, change our focus, our orientation a bit and start thinking about younger generations and everything would be okay. And as I got into more of the sort of realities, like I was talking about the urban and rural realities and just some of those things that were shifting so much, right. Even culturally, mainline churches tend to be white, other than probably the Methodist Church does a pretty good job with diversity, but most of us tend to be white. And in a new generation, my daughter's generation, there's going to be, whites will be the minority. Yeah. And so even things like that, just underrepresented racial, ethnic right. Communities in our churches. I just realized there were a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. And so I really kind of shifted from, well, let's tweak this here and there and let's figure out how to retradition these things, to we really need to start planting churches. And I think there needs to be a both and, but I see signs of excitement and vitality in both of those things. And I've seen very creative models when it comes to planting churches. People are becoming aware of sort of the financial realities of how much a building costs and how much even a pastor with decent salary and benefits cost. And so people are beginning to think about, well, can I sell coffee or sell wine or sell beer, or, can we have a monastic model where our church is not just a church, but it's also kind of bivocational in a business as well. I've seen churches that are taking food issues seriously, and they're doing things like ripping up their church lawns and starting a community garden. They're really working with local farmers to bring fresh produce to their neighborhoods. They're using the local farming to help with soup kitchens and help feed people. So there's all sorts of things that are occurring around food. There are a lot of communities that are springing up around the arts, and people who are using artist communities both with their spiritual lives and also as a way to reach out to their community. When you think sort of sociologically, I'm really impacted by the work of Bill McKibben, and he wrote a great book called Deep Community. And he talks a lot about how kind of big business and agribusiness and big box stores, and these things have really isolated us and made us independent in many ways. And so I see people who are using church to form deeper community. And so, that might mean starting a bookstore where, Barnes and Noble and Amazon has really destroyed that place where we used to come together and talk together and have our best ideas together. Recreating a coffee house where Starbucks came in and closed the local coffee houses down. Recreating so many things. We do a really good job with care of children in preschools. But can that become more of the part of the life of our church rather than kind of a money-making entity over here? Or recreating restaurants and cooking and home farm-to-table sort of ideas. So there's so many creative things that are going on. And oftentimes they're happening in older churches, and many times they're happening in new church developments or new church plants, or sometimes they're just a group of people who get together and decide, okay, well, let's start a community together.
Sure.
And so those are very exciting to me.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's exciting listening to you rattle them off. It is showing you really how the church is more authentically kind of interacting with the way we live our lives today. The way we adapt to the constraints that are around us. So, Carol, let me ask you: what are some of the attributes, skills that you see are as important for today's Christian leaders to cultivate, to make room for?
Well, certainly social media. You don't have to, be a web designer, but you have to hire one, and website designer. The website's the front door for anybody in a new generation, and the more interactive, the better. Podcasting, maybe Facebook, but these are no longer skills that you can put off. A lot of people say, oh, well, again, these are just narcissistic tools. It's really silly. It's just but no, they're absolutely crucial. And for us to be not using them would be like for us to never have a phone number. It's just going to happen. You don't have to do them all.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. We elected a younger. I'll give you a chance to get a drink or something. We elected somebody younger to our church board, and we were having a retreat, and some of the older members, were saying, "Well, are you going to this event? It's been here and here and here." And the younger person said, "I never saw that." And they said, "Well, it's been in this outlet, this outlet, this outlet." She said, "Did you put it on the Facebook page?" And the people said, "Well, no." I said, "Well, that's all me and my friends will look at." But it's getting to what you say. I mean, if this is really something you're going to take seriously about affecting and communicating with younger people, you got to go where they talk.
Right, exactly. And it's hard because our jobs are already, ridiculous, and to add something else.
And I also think what may be hard, Carol, and you know more about this than me, is that clergy in my, or church leaders in my small world have all tended to be more introverted. And I've read studies showing that if you're an extroverted person, you're going to be extroverted on the internet. And if you have a lot of friends in person, you're going to have a lot of friends on Facebook. And I wonder if the makeup of our Christian leaders, tends to be introverted, and thus we have a natural tendency to shy away.
Oh, that's interesting. I always had a pet theory that it was the opposite.
That the dweebs would be at home in their little Facebook, not wanting to be seen.
Yeah,
but of course, showing you pictures of everything they possibly have record of.
Right. I have friends who are couples, and you know them online, and then when you meet them, like the person who posts online and blogs all the time is really, really quiet, and the person who you'd ever see, because she's doing it in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's interesting that the studies are showing
Yeah,
the
there's a new
opposite.
book coming out, Click to Save. It's coming out this spring, and that's one of the things that they mention in that book is that it just, I mean, it's kind of makes sense. Both of them
Right.
make sense, actually.
Yeah. Well, but it's just something we're going to have to get over.
Yeah.
I mean, when I went into ministry, I'm an extreme introvert. And when I went into ministry, I hated the thought of asking people to join the church. And it would make me nervous and sweaty. And, I hated doing that. But guess what? I just got to get over it.
Right.
None of us like asking for money, but we got over it, right?
It's part of carrying the cross, isn't it? I mean, you can't expect to do everything that you. So my question about some of the things we need to cultivate, the first thing that came to mind for you is social media.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think of my husband's very involved with the Occupy movement. And the first two things that they set up was the media and welcoming. So they first two things. Who's going to deal with the media? Who's going to do the Twitter, the Facebook, and the traditional media, and who's going to welcome people as soon as they walk into our camp? Who's going to tell them exactly where things are? And I think that's an incredible example for our churches. Do we have something that's going out and making sure that people are connected with our church and we're telling the story of our church all the time? And do we have somebody and a way of welcoming people when they come in? And I think we'd do well if we did. So then the third thing they did was just sort of the actions, the outreaches. Well, what are we going to change, and how do we want to do that? So I think it's kind of a good model for the church. But many of the very incredible things that we do never get out. So when we are the first ones on the ground, when Katrina hits New Orleans, when we're the first ones in the midst of Haiti working there, and we're the last ones to leave when these huge crises occur. Many times people don't hear about that. What they know of Christianity is Jerry Falwell, or whatever the latest misogynist, homophobic person who's out there, Westboro Baptist, or and that's what they know. Right, because those people are media savvy, and we've decided not to be. So,
well, Carol, last question I always like to ask is if there's something that you'd like to add. Our audience is mostly Christian church leaders who are interested in building healthy congregations. Is there any word you might leave us with?
I think the main thing is just if your church is struggling. And I know right now there's a lot of budgetary issues. There's an economic crisis. There's this generational shift that's happening. There's technological issues that are coming up. And I think the main thing I want to say, and it really hasn't come out in this interview, so I'm glad you gave me this opportunity, is, a lot of pastors are doing a wonderful job, and they're working really, really hard. And a lot of church leaders are doing a wonderful job and working really, really hard. So I guess I would just say, if you feel like you're caught in this tumultuous storm, a lot of times we have the ability to look at the church leader and say, oh, well, it's her fault.
Right, yeah.
Even though, this Titanic's been sinking for 40 years, you decide it's her fault. But this is just an incredible time of transition right now. And I think, I can sit around and say, well, you should be doing that, or you should be doing this. But really, at the end of the day, we really should be supporting and celebrating the work that we're all doing. None of us know how to do this perfectly. We're all figuring out how to do church in the midst of incredible cultural shifts. So I think I would just give just a word of appreciation and love and support for all of those people who are out there working every single day, trying to do their best and trying to do it even better. And I imagine if you're listening to this or watching this, you are one of those people. So I just thank you for the work that you're doing.
And Carol, let me thank you for the work that you're doing. Carol Howard Merritt joining us on Church Next. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.